There's a deliberately constructed narrative about Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis that you've probably heard, that it's incoherent, that it's incomprehensible, that it's inaccessible to audiences. The good news is that all that take is just all bullshit. At the screening that I saw, I was surprised by just how much people really did enjoy it, given that although it's not incoherent, it is very unusual, and I expected a more bewildered response from the audience, but that isn't what happened. The audience I saw it with was engaged the whole time. They laughed at the right places and they gasped at the surprises. So many movie audiences now are rude and disengaged on their phones and talking, and there was none of that at this screening. At the end, they all clapped, and most of the audience stayed all the way through the credits, and then at the end of the credits, they clapped again. I heard the guy behind me say, "That was the most movie that I've ever seen," which I thought was a pretty great description. Before the movie, I had been chatting with the guy to my side, and afterward I asked him what he thought. He was obviously still thinking it over and absorbing it, but he was smiling, and he said, "I kind of fucking loved it." I was relieved that people were open-minded enough to react that way, because in the end, the idea that the movie is difficult and impenetrable is just a lie. The truth is that it's actually extremely funny and fast-paced and entertaining. I know it's a certain kind of audience that would go to the special early screening of the movie and that they might be more informed about it and more predisposed to like it, but they're evidence that if people are open to the experience, and there's nothing stopping them from loving the movie. In contrast, the people that don't like it don't just say that it's not to their personal taste. They're angry and hostile about it. I thought this one review I read from somebody called Jackson Weaver at CBC was really something. He doesn't just say that he doesn't like it or that he thought it didn't work. He says it's one of the worst movies ever made and that it has little value. He really says that. Those are his words, little value. Even if it was one of the worst movies ever made, it's still beautiful to look at, and to see the personal vision of one of our greatest filmmakers obviously has great intrinsic value, even if it wasn't any good. But to call it one of the worst movies ever made is just simply stupid. The reviewer doesn't simply say that he didn't understand it, because that would be admitting a failure on his part. Instead, he says that it's incomprehensible, meaning that he didn't fail to understand it, but rather that it's impossible to understand. I hate to tell him, but just because you're too dumb to comprehend something, that doesn't mean it's incomprehensible. There are two reactions you can have when you don't understand something. Stupid people get angry and lash out when they don't understand something rather than trying to understand it. This is why they stay stupid, because they never seek to learn. This review keeps saying things like impenetrable and inaccessible, and he's really mad that Coppola seems to think that he's smart and wants to make movies for smart people. This is the reaction of idiots to things that they don't understand. Rather than trying to understand, they get mad at the other person for being smarter than them. They think it's condescending for the other person to not sink to their level. If you're smart, though, seeing something you don't understand should make you curious, not angry. I scrolled through this moron's X account, and his whole shtick seems to be pissing on movies that are critically acclaimed or directed by auteurs who dare to show too much of their own personality. If he thinks the smart people liked it, he needs to bring it down a peg. He thought that The Brutalist and Kinds of Kindness were overrated. I had to scroll back to March to find a movie that he actually liked. So, I mean, do you want to guess what met his exacting standards? He really liked Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire. His brain is so rotted by corporate slop that that's what he thinks movies are. The fourth sequel in a 4-decade-old zombie franchise that hasn't really been any good since the first movie, but just keeps chugging along because it sells toys and brainless fanboys will go to see anything that has a brand that they recognize.
What will happen to cinema? Will it stay the way it is, or will it ever more turn into basically making sequels and the same movie over and over again?
Films are supposed to push us forward,
Right.
not give us another dose of something we've already seen.
This is why people like that have spent 5 years rage crying about Scorsese saying that comic book movies aren't cinema. They know that dismissing those movies is telling them that they have bad taste, because those are the movies that they like. But rather than trying to understand why one of our greatest living filmmakers might think that they have bad taste, they'd rather get angry and kick and scream and attack him for telling the truth. The same reaction is part of the reason for the hostility towards Megalopolis, or maybe I'd say about half of the reason, and I'll get to the other half later. But none of the reasons you see people attacking this movie for are because the movie is actually bad or as confusing as they make it out to be. When people talk about this movie being so bizarre and strange, they're revealing that they're too ignorant about film history to know how provincial they sound. Coppola does employ many techniques here that you won't see in a lot of mainstream movies, but while he does use them in ways that are fresh and exciting, most of the techniques he's using here actually go back to silent movies. Even something like the live actor that comes in and talks cast Adam Driver's character for a scene, which is getting a huge reaction from people making out to be the weirdest thing ever, that actually goes back to the days of silent movies also in a way. Movies then often had live musical accompaniment, so there might be somebody on organ or even an orchestra playing along to the movie. This element of live performance combined with the film makes the movie exist in the moment, because what you're seeing will only happen that one time, and the movie is different every time people see it. In fact, a lot of Megalopolis has strong roots in the language of silent movies. It's the work of an artist who wants to be experimental and bold and push forward the language of movies, but he was also coming from the point of view of somebody with a deep love and knowledge of movie history and the context for what he's doing. If the movie was on streaming so I could pause it and analyze clips, I could go into some of the things he's doing in more detail. So maybe I'll do an updated version of this video later showing how many of the aesthetic things that he does here are actually a century old, because I think that would be something interesting to talk about. But the point is that it isn't as wild as it seems unless you're the kind of person who thinks that, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is an example of a good movie. There are obviously many experimental films out there that are far stranger than Megalopolis, and a movie like, say, Tree of Life is more impressionistic and less narratively driven. Any number of David Lynch movies are probably stranger in terms of style than Megalopolis, but those things are kind of relegated by people to the realm of art house movies, whereas Megalopolis costs $120 million and it's getting a wide release on IMAX screens, so it ends up on the radar of people who aren't prepared to handle anything outside of the usual formulas. Mainstream movies have become locked into particular ways of doing things because the studios only care about money and they're pathologically risk averse. If there's a particular kind of scene or a particular character dynamic that a story is going to portray, there's now a playbook of movies that have done something like that in the past, and so they look at movies like that and there's a particular set of choices and expectations about how to do it. Audiences, of course, are conditioned to expect the same formulas because they've seen the same things done the same ways so many times that they have the assumption that that's how things are supposed to be done. There's a particular rhythm to most mainstream movies, a particular structure, particular beats. It's not art or storytelling, it's math. This is why so many studios are interested in using AI to replace artists now, because AI can basically do what they want artists to do, because what they want artists to do isn't creative. AI doesn't create things, it copies old things and reassembles them into configuration based on audience demands. This is the same thing that a screenwriter working for Marvel Studios is doing when they reassemble old movies into the same movie again, but with a different IP and a few different actors. What Coppola is doing here that seems so wild to people is simply looking at a scene and trying to see what the best way is to convey a particular idea, as opposed to what is the expected way. If you're not locked into a particular kind of realism and you're willing to do something that's a little surreal or abstract, which in this case suits the story, then there's a whole language of ideas out there that you can use that most films never bother with. They say that we've explored maybe 5% of the language of film, and we've been stuck there. Studios not wanting to risk money exploring the other 95% when they know they can make money off the first 5%. Audiences are so used to their 5% that they think that's all the movies can do because that's all that they've ever seen movies do. And they don't watch art to be challenged. They watch it as entertainment to comfort them. So when something challenges them or requires effort on their part, they feel betrayed because they're not getting the comfort food that they thought they were buying with their ticket.
Is this society? Is this way we're living the only one that's available to us?
Part of the entire theme of Megalopolis is whether there's another way rather than the old accepted, old-fashioned ways of doing things, and Coppola looking for unusual ways to express these ideas is in keeping with that theme. Talking about how weird Megalopolis is, what people should be saying is that it's beautiful and poetic. 2001 was as experimental as this in places, and that movie came out almost 60 years ago. Even something like Baz Luhrmann's Elvis movie had moments that were as abstract as some of Megalopolis. Megalopolis really isn't that fucking strange, and any media literate adult shouldn't have that hard of a time understanding it. On a plot level, it's actually pretty straightforward, and there isn't anything that's actually difficult to follow. It's concerned with more than the plot, though, and in service of the themes that the plot is meant to explore, and in portraying the emotions and thoughts of the characters, the movie can be surreal and it's sometimes abstract, but that really shouldn't be asking too much of an audience. Films can communicate things visually with symbols. They don't have to be just a photographic record of a fictional event. There are things in the movie that are ambiguous and elude simple verbalized explanations, but that's because film is a visual medium. Nobody ever promised you that everything you see in a movie should have a direct meaning that's easily verbalized. Another thing some audiences have a lot of problems with is ambiguity, but it's the job of art to ask questions and not always to give you the answers.
It has the principle of show not tell, which is also, I think, what you were kind of also alluding to now, which is I feel about films. Let me tell you exactly what the plot is. Let me tell you what to feel about it, and leave nothing for you to discover. And that usually those aren't the movies that I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
Historically, I want, they're one version when they come out, and then years later, because you evolve or the world around has evolved, and it's something completely different, and they keep giving you things. That's what I feel about most of Francis's movies.
All of a sudden, I got it. I'm not supposed to know everything. I'm not supposed to know all the answers. When we don't understand something, there are parts of the movie I go, oh, I don't really quite understand that, but I'm still thinking about it. It's supposed to inspire us to a new way of thinking. And in the end, that inspiration is supposed to allow us to have hope for our world. And believe me, I do, because of you.
People want answers and everything spelled out for them. If they aren't told what to think and you don't spell out what the movie means, the incurious people think that the movie is meaningless. If they're confused, they get angry. I think that's about half of the reason for the hostility towards this movie, but the other half launched a full-on smear campaign against Megalopolis and a personal campaign against Coppola before anybody had even seen the movie. Almost as soon as the movie started filming, there were leaked reports from anonymous sources claiming that it was a disaster and that the set was out of control and that Coppola had no idea what he was doing. If you read between the lines on these reports, though, you can see very easily that the leaked reports were from people who were disgruntled because they'd been fired from the movie. The common theme in the reports is that Coppola is old-fashioned and out of touch because he wanted to have everything his way and he thought that he should be in charge of everything. Imagine that. The artist making the art and who is entirely self-financing the art thinks that he's the one who should be making the creative decisions. These people whining were fired because they were hired to do a job and they weren't doing it, and so to make it his fault instead of theirs, they went and complained about him, hiding behind anonymity. In truth, the people who worked on the movie and who weren't fired say it was one of the best working environments they've ever had in their life.
Because he financed it himself, it made the shooting process one of the best experiences, if not the best shooting experience I've ever had. There was no excess conversation. There was no people robbing from Peter to pay Paul. Not even just the financial part of it. It felt like he was in control of the movie that he wanted to make, and that was it. It felt like, oh, this is how movies should be.
And then when we got there and started making it, I was surprised by how much freedom that he gives everyone, and that he embodies his principle and puts his money where his mouth. I mean, he's making it himself. So because he was making it himself, there was no ancillary people getting in the way. So it was one of the best shooting experiences I ever had. Really? Well, yeah, hands down. And this one, there was nobody getting in the way, so it felt like a conversation that you were just happening with Francis from the minute we started talking about it till the last, the last few months of it. It still goes on. It's mystifying to me for an article to actually come out in the midst of making it, where I'm sure if you. There's no set way to make a film. We come up with ideas just to give it structure and maybe to make it so that everybody gets a chance to sleep at some point. But everyone's making it up, and the idea that, sure, if someone came on our set and had never seen a film before or had seen a lot of films, they would look at what Francis was doing and not understand. That to me is what is great about what this thing is, not the opposite, that it's supposed to be living up to someone else's idea of what a film should be. That's what I feel like.
In every interview where he can, Adam Driver has been making the point of how wonderful it was to work on a movie where the director was the one in charge and not a bunch of studio bureaucrats. Because Coppola was paying for it himself, he didn't have to deal with all the middle management. As Driver says, this is how movies should be made. People get upset by it because they're talentless parasites that don't want to lose control, which they never should have had in the first place. All those other people are putting in their opinions because they have money, not because they're artists or have any insight into the movie. You can tell after some of the other kinds of projects that Adam Driver's worked on, it's a huge relief to him not to have to deal with all that nonsense. It's important for him to fight for this kind of filmmaking. Contrary to reports of a disastrous filming experience, Driver keeps saying over and over that it's the best experience he's ever had filming a movie.
Yeah, it was one of the best shooting experiences I've ever had. Yeah, that's my takeaway. As I was saying earlier, it's been one of the best shooting experiences.
When he's talking about how this movie is different from other movies that deal with studios meddling and middle management making problems just to justify their own salaries, he doesn't name any movies that he's talking about, of course, but from somebody who's been on things like Disney Star Wars movies, it's easy to know exactly what he's talking about. This movie exists in opposition to those systems, and all those unnecessary parasites in those other movies know they need a new line of work if movies were made like this and filmmakers had control like they're supposed to have. And that's the real reason for the attacks against Coppola in the movie. The attacks have been coming mainly from industry trade magazines like Variety, which of course corporations have a vested interest in the studios keeping control of how movies are made. They're run and owned by the exact same kinds of parasites that Driver is so relieved didn't have a chance to ruin this movie. So when Coppola says, fuck all that, he's going to do it his own way, he doesn't need them or their money, he's a threat to the jobs of those people and their whole business model. It's very, very important to them to convince people that everything would be a disaster without all the money men and middle management there giving orders. The exact same people whose absence Driver said made the filming of this movie one of the best experiences of his life. After the reports of supposed chaos on the set, the same trade magazines launched into accusations of sexual misconduct, accusing Coppola of touching and kissing female extras on set against their will. These reports were made again by the same disgruntled anonymous sources, not by the women who were supposedly victimized, and Variety claimed that they had video proof and posted a low-resolution video that shows Coppola from the back and in which it's not even clear what's happening or whether he even kissed anybody. As soon as those reports went up, the woman in the video came forward and said that not only was she not kissed against her will and that the story was fake, but that she was upset at the video being leaked because it was supposed to have been a closed set and filming her and posting it was a violation of her privacy. In spite of that, Variety kept the video up and posted no retraction. While claiming they were concerned about abuse victims, the wishes of the supposed victim in the video weren't as important to Variety as their real mission, which was smearing Coppola. He's suing them for defamation now, and I hope he wins.
I'm aware that we're living in times, post-internet, which is where many things are changing. One of the things that are changing is journalism is going through a trauma of how will journalism survive? We're witnessing, we're witnessing the death of journalism and the death of the Hollywood studio system, both which are wonderful. And we're witnessing those two institutions die right while we're here. What is for journalism to retreat behind unknown sources and become trying to get clicks to say something bad because that something bad will always get a click and something good that it's sad to be at a time when two great institutions are dying, but something will replace them.
These industry trade publications launched a full-on smear campaign with attacks against Coppola that have been proven false, and even after they were proven false, they kept at it anyway. Coppola's movie threatens the studios for one set of reasons, and it threatens the dumber audience members invested in brainless entertainment for another set of reasons. But the two kinds of backlash work together because the basic root of them is anger at an artist doing things his own way, not just doing what's demanded of him by studios or by the audience. People lash out because to them, Coppola's freedom means loss of their control. They want to keep artists in their place, which they feel is a position of servitude, because that's how they control their dopamine supply. This personal animus towards Coppola and his desire to operate outside of the control of the studio system led to idiots simply buying the fake narrative that he was some kind of out-of-control egomaniac, which they latched onto as an explanation for why it was Coppola's fault and not the fault of their own stupidity that they couldn't understand the movie. In the end, it's really sad and it's a real shame to have all this hate and hostility directed towards the movie, because the message the movie is ultimately trying to express is a vision of optimism and unity for the human race, including humans that Coppola personally disagrees with. A while back, when casting information started to come out, I said that between Dustin Hoffman and Shia LaBeouf and Jon Voight, it seemed like Coppola was making a deliberate effort to cast actors that had been canceled in one way or another. And in recent interviews, Coppola has confirmed that that actually was his intention.
You cast Jon Voight in a role that bears a strong resemblance to Donald Trump, and he is, of course, an outspoken supporter of Trump. Can you tell us a bit about this decision?
Basically, I was above politics. I didn't want to just cast people who politically were the same, but everyone worked wonderfully together above all the politics, and that's the point. We can all work together, we human beings, and create a beautiful world for the children. That's what the film says. If I may say, one of the things about our wonderful cast is that they reflect all sorts of political ideas. This is not just one notion. How do you feel about the future? How can we make a beautiful world for the children?
Well, first of all, I think that your longing to contribute to that has created this film. That's what your focus is to make a better world for where are we going? And I think we're all at this moment asking that question of ourselves, to see what can we do to make this world better. And I know it's possible. I agree with this film. Francis' vision that says human beings are capable of solving every problem we get ourselves into.
No, it's true. He was one of the earliest actors who said, you have to make this. That's the first thing you told me in L.A. when I showed it to you.
Yeah.
He was, and politically, we're not in the same world.
Yeah.
So there is different opinions here.
Of course, the people trying to cancel Coppola and make up fictional stories about him being a sex predator latched on to Coppola casting these people as evidence of him being some kind of degenerate personality. But the reason he would do this should be obvious if you have even the vaguest understanding of the themes of the film. The movie is about the idea of how we could build a utopia in the future. And of course, in a utopia, we'd have to learn to move past this childish and ignorant idea that we can just expel everybody we disagree with from society. A utopia would mean a world where everybody is able to coexist. And so Coppola was deliberately casting actors with whom he disagreed or who had been shunned for one reason or another to show that there's a path forward where we can all work together to a common purpose. For it to be a utopia, everybody needs to learn to live together. I personally disagree with Jon Voight on just about everything as far as politics go, and I've never even really been a big fan of Shia LaBeouf, but the end result in this case is that their two characters are probably the two best performances in the whole movie, and the art that they made here wouldn't exist if Coppola had just discarded them because the internet told him to. The idea that if we work through our differences we'll make something of value and find beauty on the other side is ultimately a profound, optimistic message that I think is really valuable now. But of course the drooling mob that wants to cancel everybody in the first place wants to use Coppola's comments about his decision here as another excuse to cancel him.
You say all your films can be described by one word. Mm-hmm. They have one word at the heart of them. The Godfather was succession. Mm-hmm. Apocalypse Now was morality. The Conversation was privacy. What's Megalopolis?
Loyalty. We have to really decide to what and to whom and to we are loyal and we give our heart to. And I say, let's give it to our human family because we've existed for 300,000 years. And we are a family of geniuses. No one ever says it. But I mean, what other creature can do what we can do and can chart the human genome and change it or send craft to Mars and photograph it and go move iceberg? In other words, there are many intelligent living things that are under our protection because we want to preserve living things. How can we not say we're geniuses? It's so obvious, but the reason we don't say it, we're not allowed to say it, they say hubris. You know, the biggest gamble I took was Apocalypse Now because I was on the hook for it and interest was over 20%. And people are still seeing Apocalypse Now. And I feel pretty confident that no matter what happens, people are going to be going to see Megalopolis for the next 40 years. And maybe a period where it's an apparent disaster, but over time, I feel sanguine. I didn't make it to make money. I made it for people to change how they feel about one another. And I fear that the film industry has become more a matter of people being hired to meet their debt obligations because the studios are in great debt. And the job is not so much to make good movies. The job is to make sure that they pay their debt obligations. I never was crazy to have a lot of money. I figured I would do what I love. I don't care. I never cared about money.
In the end, what the studios really can't abide is this idea that movies might exist for purposes other than making money. This is a threat to the parasites in Hollywood who exist only to make money and are just exploiting art for that purpose and not as a means to itself. This is why people mocked Coppola so much for the trailer that came out, which he didn't make, positioning him as an artist against the system.
True genius is often misunderstood.
The problem with the trailer was that he used fake quotes because it was made by a marketing idiot who used AI to generate the quotes and didn't bother to check them and doesn't know anything about the history of film criticism. And that kind of person is exactly the kind of person that works at the studios that are attacking Coppola, the exact kind of soulless person who only cares about marketing and doesn't see a difference between something made by AI and something made by an artist. But the premise of critics not understanding Coppola's work and Coppola being ahead of Hollywood is of course true. They don't see that when they're attacking Coppola for the trailer, the parts of the trailer that they're attacking him for are the parts that are generated by their own backward anti-artist thinking. While through no fault of Coppola's own, the quotes in the trailer might have been fake, it's true that he's been ahead of the studios and critics and has faced consistent opposition to making what turned out to be his most successful films.
Ultimately, nothing was to prepare to the experience of The Godfather. Number one, it was a terrible experience. I was always on the verge of about to get fired, and a lot of my choices were immediately discarded. I wanted Al Pacino to play the character Michael, and they said that's ridiculous. No one's ever heard of him. And I wanted Marlon Brando to be the now famous Don Corleone, and they said, oh, he's a lot of trouble, and no one's going to see his films anymore. I wanted to make it in New York. They said, you can't make it in New York. It's too expensive. I wanted to make it set in 1945, the way the book was. They said, it's ridiculous. You can't do it. You can't have it. You can't do it. And this is a terrible movie, to the point where at least 4 occasions I came that close to getting fired. And then, surprise was surprise, it turns out to be this gigantic success. I made Apocalypse Now right after I had won 5 Oscars and was probably one of the hottest young, if not the hottest young director in Hollywood. And absolutely nobody wanted to be in Apocalypse Now, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. So I own Apocalypse Now for one simple reason: nobody else wanted it.
When Apocalypse Now came out, people said, what on earth is this film? Now everyone thinks it's a masterpiece, or many people think it's a masterpiece. It was a similar reaction to Megalopolis in Cannes this summer. What do you think of the final product?
The test of time is, you said, well, some think it's a masterpiece. Bottom line is Apocalypse Now still earns a lot of money every year, and it's been 50 years. When I was young, I remember I wanted to make a musical, and I was told, well, you know, musicals are not being made now. And I said, well, why not? He said, because they've decided that musicals are not a good form. And then later on, I wanted to make a Western, and I was told, well, Westerns are not really being made now. I developed a whole Western that I thought was a really wonderful script with a writer who had written it, and no one, they said they're not doing Westerns, and so I lost it. But fortunately, Clint Eastwood bought the script and made it, and it was called, what was the great Clint Eastwood Western?
Unforgiven?
The Unforgiven. It was the script that nobody would let me make. So I don't understand this idea that certain movies can be made and certain movies can't be made. I guess what I'm saying in a sentence is that I tried not to adhere to the rules and try to live by my own rules.
And I refused to be a fool, dancing on the string held by all those big shots.
Fans buy into the anti-artist propaganda from studios and also think that success is all about money because they want to be pandered to, not realizing that being pandered to doesn't mean that anybody cares about pleasing them. It just means that they care about taking their money. They don't know what art is or why it exists, and they're happy to remain stupid. They strike out at anything that doesn't exist solely for the reason of entertaining them, in part because part of them knows that they're stupid, so they're invested in upholding the system that exists to take their money because it also affirms them for their ignorance and their bad taste. Those people attacking this movie for those reasons are going to have to live with being viewed by history like one of those people who saw 2001 or Psycho in early screenings and thought it was bad because they didn't understand what they were watching. At this point, I have pretty much zero patience for people who don't like this movie because they're mostly not reacting against the movie. They're reacting against the idea that movies can be experimental and challenging and different. They're reacting against artists having control of their own work. They're reacting against optimism and challenges to the status quo. They're reacting against art doing exactly what art's supposed to do. They're reacting against the idea that there might be new and different and better ways to do things in the future.
You know, in the end, there's so many people, when they die, they say, oh, I wish I had done this, I wish I had done that. But when I die, I'm going to say, I got to do this, and I got to see my daughter win an Oscar, and I got to make wine, and I got to make every movie I wanted to make, and I'm going to be so busy thinking of all the things that I got to do that when I die, I won't notice it.